back to Digital Christianity, a mini-series brought to you by Reformed Youth Ministries. This is episode 8, The Subtle Ways TikTok is Toxic. It's somewhat ironic to reference two Substacks in an episode discussing TikTok. Substack, as many of you may know, is a social platform that promotes reading and words. TikTok, not so much. The title of this episode is using the title of a Substack written by O. Alan Noble. You can access his article with a discount code in the show notes of this podcast. We'll get to that more in just a bit, but I wanted to reference a fascinating article written by Ted Goya. Now, full disclosure, I may be mispronouncing his last name, so Ted, if you're listening, my apologies. Ted is a very thoughtful and interesting writer, and I'd encourage you to check out his Substack, The Honest Broker. The title of this article asks the question, are social media platforms the next dying malls? He says it was cool to hang out at the mall until it wasn't. He talks about his small hometown and a mall that he actually helped to build, which is now abandoned. Some of you may be aware of YouTube channels exploring old malls that are now empty. Once filled with people, but are now an eyesore. Just Google dead malls and you'll see what I'm talking about. Ted says that this is what social media platforms are becoming. I'll circle back to this in a minute, but let's move our attention to TikTok because no one has spent enough time talking about that platform lately.
Yes. So I'm Dr. Alan Noble, Associate Professor of English at Oklahoma Baptist University and a fellow at the Keller Center for Cultural Apologetics.
Since Alan takes a strong stance on TikTok, I did want to ask him if he's ever had a TikTok account, if he currently has a TikTok, or what other social media platforms he uses.
So I'm not on TikTok. I was on TikTok briefly and tried cross-posting some short reels that I was making to promote one of my books on Instagram. Tried cross-posting those onto TikTok to see if it could get some traction. And I wasn't scrolling on TikTok, but in having conversations with my students about their use of TikTok and what it was doing to them, I felt guilty just being a part of it at all. And so I eventually just uninstalled it. I don't know if I deleted my account officially or not, but I just got rid of it and pulled myself off because it just it was just not something I wanted to be a part of. I think in terms of tiers of social media platforms, there are some social media platforms that I want just nothing to do with. I think they're just irredeemable. And in my opinion, TikTok and I think probably Snapchat is probably one of those. At least for me, I just don't think that they're redeemable. I think there are just too many pitfalls. And then I think there are some social media platforms like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter that can be used in ways that are redeemable if you develop the virtue of temperance and you can use them in moderation and you use them for certain purposes. So, for example, I think those platforms are really good for sharing jokes. I think they're very good for talking about sports scores and trash talking other sports fans. I think those are perfectly legitimate uses of those platforms. And I think they're good at pointing people off of social media. So saying, hey, here's a great book I read. Go read that book. Or here's a great article I read. Go read that article. Or here's a great album. Go listen to that album. I think those are good uses of social media. And, I think if you cultivate carefully your Instagram, you can use it to share your family photos with just your family. And, there are different tools you can use to prudently use that platform as well. But that's how I think about it. I think about it in that tiered way.
If you're not familiar with Alan Noble or any of his writings, you really need to be. He doesn't write hot takes or clickbaity type of things. While some people may say that he has content that would fall into either one of those categories that I just referenced, his takes are thoughtful and well-informed. He doesn't say something without giving a good amount of reflection about it. So I asked him what were the origins of this article, The Subtle Ways TikTok is Toxic.
Yeah, so two things. One is, as I said earlier, conversations with my students. I've had enough conversations with students who come to me and say, I spent the last, 3 hours of my night scrolling on TikTok, and nobody ever says that to me with a smile on their face. Nobody ever says like, that was a great use of my time. I'm really glad that I did that. It's always regret. It's always regret. And hearing from some of them that they've, gotten into things that they would not have gotten into otherwise, whether it's pornographic or other kinds of material, because the algorithm fed them more of the content that they were looking for, or that they didn't know they were looking for, but the algorithm thought they did. And over time, they just followed the algorithm down the hole. And soon they were caught up in something that they really shouldn't have been. And so that really concerned me, because I feel like especially just how strongly algorithm led that platform is, and how addictive it is, just the constant stream of video content seemed very alarming to me. And then the other thing was this news article from NPR, talking about the Kentucky lawsuit, which improperly, if I remember correctly, they improperly redacted a lawsuit. And instead of hiding these personal details from TikTok's internal memos, they actually ended up releasing these internal memos, which was great for us because we got to see what TikTok knows about what they're doing. And when you see the people inside of TikTok talking about what they're doing and what they know about the effects of their own product, it's just very revealing. Okay, this is bad news, and they know it. They know what they are doing, and they're choosing to do it anyway. That's evil. So I wanted to get that message out there.
As I got into the content of Alan's article, he highlights two primary concerns from this platform that actually deform the user. Now, don't gloss too quickly over the word deform. There are ways in which TikTok is deforming users. The first is related to beauty. Here's what he says.
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that happen. There are two things that I would highlight. So first is the way the algorithm pushes beautiful images of beautiful people upon us, so that we have the impression that the norm is to be a beautiful person. And so we have a false perception of what it means to be a normal person. And we have a false perception of what we should look like. And now, to some extent, this is not a new problem, right? There's been, I remember being younger and people talking about the beauty standards of people on television, right? All the people on television are beautiful. And so that gives you this false perception of what it means to be, a beautiful person. There's a difference, though. There's a difference. And the difference is this. On television, growing up, I always knew this was artificial, because these weren't real people. These were actors. These were models. These were artificial people. But the social media gives at least the impression that these are everyday people, right? And so you have everyday, quote unquote, people who just happen to be really good looking, and they're constantly filling your feed. And if you're a young woman and you're constantly seeing other young women who are really attractive, you're thinking maybe I'm inadequate, right? If you're a young man, maybe you're thinking you're inadequate, or maybe you're thinking, maybe all of a sudden you set standards that are unrealistic, right? You say, well, that's, I'm not going to settle for any woman who doesn't look, like that, because that's the standard. That's the norm. And so that's part of the problem, I think. And I think it's a serious problem, because it's the way we view the world, and it's replacing the way we view the world with this artificial lens through a screen. Another part of the problem is these filters that you can use to change your appearance. And so there are filters that will use AI to make you seem more beautiful. And they do a really good job of altering your features, changing your cheekbone structure, your jaw structure, your facial structure to be more, symmetrical and, attractive according to somebody's standard, I suppose. And of course, other people can tell, I think, if you're using these filters, but it gives, again, the illusion of beauty. And it gives, again, this standard that beauty is a certain high level of beauty is the norm, not the real world, where some people are more beautiful than others, and that's okay. There's a beauty in that diversity of attractiveness. Some of us have very asymmetric features. Some of us started going bald at 18. That's me. And I'm still dealing with that's okay. And that's okay. That's fine. I'm still dealing with it, but it's fine.
Yes.
And I fear that young people will have these false impressions of what is normal, and they'll feel like they have to measure up to those false impressions, or they'll hold other people up to those false standards in ways that are just unrealistic and unattainable. And that's just not healthy.
Now, please don't mishear what he's saying. When Alan is talking about the fact that beautiful people are having their content promoted on TikTok, he's referencing the algorithm the platform created to promote some people's features over others. Just a reminder, this is all documented in the leaked internal documents that were highlighted in the NPR article. You can access that article in the show notes below. But be thinking about this. How is that algorithm impacting your child's view of their own facial features, their own body? More with Alan in just a bit. Tech realist Samuel D. James examines the connection between patterns in technology and human desires. Everyone longs for a glimpse of heaven, but James argues they are just looking for it in the wrong place, the internet. In his book, Digital Liturgies, Rediscovering Christian Wisdom in an Online Age, James exposes 5 digital liturgies that prohibit people from contemplating big truths, accepting the uncomfortable, and acknowledging God as their creator. It then calls the reader to live faithfully before Christ, finding wisdom through Scripture and rest in God's perfect design. Study questions for each chapter are included and can be used as prompts for reflection alone or in a small group setting. Pick up a copy of Digital Liturgies wherever books are sold, or visit crossway.org/plus. That's crossway.org/plus to find out how you can get 30% off with a free Crossway Plus account. RYM would like to thank Crossway Books for sponsoring this episode. If you want an easy way to access information about digital liturgies, please check out the link in the show notes below. I began this episode talking about Ted Goya's article, which asks if social media platforms are the next dying malls. Ted gives 5 reasons why he draws this correlation, but let me just highlight one. A reason malls died was due to the fact that there were too many of them. Social media, says Goya, is entering that same phase right now. He points to something called the law of reflexivity, and he writes this: powerful trends actually cause their own collapse because of the very intensity of their rise. So in the United States, 400 of the 2,000 largest malls shut down during just a 3-year period, and the bloodletting isn't over. Experts believe as many as half of the existing malls may not survive another 2 decades. This is exactly the situation in social media, where hundreds or thousands of platforms compete for community members, and more get launched every month. People keep telling me that I need to move to Threads or Blue Sky or Twitch or TikTok or Discord or Truth Social or Snapchat or Rumble or YouTube Shorts or whatever. I've set up profiles on some of these platforms, says Goya, but then sooner or later, I just walk away. Who has the time to post on all these apps? Others are also abandoning the apps. Goya realizes now that these social media platforms need us more than we need them. In many ways, social media platforms are beginning to get more desperate. If you think about TikTok or Instagram or Snapchat, they're all starting to borrow and share similarities in their platforms, which is making them less appealing for many. This fact alone highlights their desperation. Let's return back to my conversation with Alan as he highlights another concern with TikTok, and it's something he calls filter bubbles.
Yeah, so a filter bubble is a kind of group of ideas or images or themes that someone can get invested in. So the example I use in the article is pastors who wear $1,000 sneakers. On Instagram, because you can do this on Instagram too, on using Reels. For a long time, at some point, I got sent by the Instagram algorithm one video of some pastor wearing, really expensive sneakers. And I just stared like a train wreck at this thought of just like, why would this pastor spend thousands of dollars on sneakers? And it immediately sent me more, and it kept sending me these really hipster pastors wearing really expensive clothing, and it just more and more ridiculous videos. And I was in a filter bubble, and it kept sending me more and more content like that. And so, that's an innocuous filter bubble, right? I'm not going to go out and think, hey, I'm going to buy some tennis shoes and become a hipster pastor with, $1,000 tennis shoes. That doesn't affect anyone in any sort of meaningful negative way, or it doesn't affect me in any meaningful negative way. But there are some real serious filter bubbles, some having to do with eating disorders, body dissatisfaction, depression, and those are really scary. There's one called Thinspiration, which is this obsession about becoming, incredibly thin. And so, within 30 minutes, you're getting channeled into this down this hole, which I described earlier with my students. You're getting channeled down this hole, down this path. And Instagram does this, YouTube does this, but I think TikTok does this the worst, down this path that can lead you to some pretty dark places. And I think one of the things that's so scary about this, to some extent, none of this is new. So for example, if you got into, if you got depressed and started surrounding yourself with really depressing music, in the 90s, and started reading really depressing novels, you could do that. You could indulge those thoughts, in other words, right? But but other people would notice, and other people would see. It would be public, and it would take time, and it would take effort. But with this, it's it's like 30 minutes and it's private, right? It's just you and your phone. You can do this in your bed. It's at night. Nobody knows what you're doing. And all of a sudden you're sucked down a hole into some subculture that is, really into glorifying depression or self-diagnosing, some mental health disorder in a way that's just really not healthy for you, or glorifying anxiety or whatever it might be, right? And that's part of the frightening thing about it. It's not a healthy way, to live.
Once again, we need to think about the teenagers in our lives, parents and youth pastors. If your child or student is on Instagram or Snapchat or other platforms, you can be fairly confident they are seeing filter bubbles all the time. Whatever they're pausing on or liking is creating this bubble. Listen to what the NPR article from October 2024 highlighted. TikTok pushes users into filter bubbles like Pain Hub and Sad Notes. TikTok is well aware of filter bubbles. Internal documents show the company has defined them as when a user encounters only information and opinions that conform to and reinforce their own beliefs, caused by algorithms that personalize an individual's online experience. The company knows the dangers of filter bubbles. During one internal safety presentation in 2020, employees warned the app can serve potentially harmful content expeditiously. TikTok conducted internal experiments with test accounts to see how quickly they descend into negative filter bubbles. After following several Pain Hub and Sad Notes accounts, it took me 20 minutes to drop into negative filter bubbles, one employee wrote. Another employee said there are a lot of videos mentioning suicide, including one asking, if you could kill yourself without hurting anybody, would you? Despite these heatings, TikTok's algorithm still puts users into filter bubbles. One internal document states that users are placed into filter bubbles after 30 minutes of use in one sitting. In many ways, if you want to know what's going on in the heart of your child, check out their social media accounts. I'm not even suggesting that you sneak behind their back and do this, but ask them if you can see what they're looking at. Ask them if you can look at it with them. While uncomfortable or awkward, it may open the door to some conversation. As we start to draw this to a close, I wanted to give some time for Alan to discuss a sensitive matter. He cautions the self-diagnosing that many teens are doing today. Much of that is connected to the influencers they follow. But he says something about glorifying our depression or anxiety. Listen to what he says.
Yeah, nobody wants to talk about this, and you're right, it is super sensitive, and we do need to be respectful and sensitive. So, what I'm not saying is that if you're depressed, you're necessarily glorifying or self-pitying yourself. But I am saying that it is a reality that you can be depressed or anxious or suffering from some mental condition, and at the same time fall in love with that condition, fall in love with that depression, fall in love with that anxiety. And by that, I mean you come to feel safe and secure and comfortable in it. You find solace in it. You find your identity in it. You find almost a little bit of hope or security in it. And it feels normal, and because you've been around it for so long. And it's understandable to feel this way if you've suffered with it for a long time, because that familiarity is what makes it normal. And so of course it's going to feel normal, and of course it's going to feel strange and uncomfortable to change. And so there is a kind of safety component where you're going to have the virtue of courage to let go and move on. But we have to be honest with ourselves and recognize when we are wrapping ourselves up with depression, when we're wrapping ourselves up with anxiety and saying, this is my safety, this is what's going to keep me safe, my depression, my anxiety. This is who I am. This is my identity. And it's a hard place to come to, but what can happen on social media is that we can glorify our condition together. We can find communities where we self-pity in community, where we encourage each other to be, with pity and with our condition. And instead of, and here's the key, instead of encouraging each other toward healing and recovery, which is what a healthy mental health community looks like, you're actually looking at a community that doesn't actually talk about recovery and doesn't actually talk about healing, but instead talks about staying in that condition and wants to stay in that condition because that's the identity of that community. And I think there's a lot of that online.
Just so you're aware, Alan has been very vocal about his own depression. He's written extensively about this and actually published a book dealing with this entitled On Getting Out of Bed, The Burden and Gift of Living. As Alan said, one of his concerns with filter bubbles is that many of them actually feed depression and anxiety. In other words, there are influencers that have entire platforms based on depression and anxiety, so they need people who are dependent upon them. I want to acknowledge the fact that there are helpful online communities dealing with depression and anxiety. Alan and I don't intend to discredit those at all. What we both would highlight is the vital importance of embodied communities. Not simply confiding in people through an app, but confiding in those who are embodied in our neighborhoods, our schools, and most importantly, our churches. You've been listening to Digital Christianity by Reformed Youth Ministries. For more information about our summer conferences, youth leader training, and resources, visit rym.org. If you would take the time to leave a positive review and share this podcast with others, it's one small way to help our ministry. Stay tuned to the RYM podcast for more great content that seeks to serve the church in her efforts to reach and equip youth for Christ.